Welcome to my Bob Thurman podcast. I'm so grateful some good friends enabled me to present them to you. If you enjoy them and find them useful, please think of becoming a member of Tibet House US to help preserve Tibetan culture. Tibet House is the Dalai Lama's cultural center in America. All best wishes. Have a great day.
This is episode 322, Meeting Vimalakirti.
Okay, so he's sort of the most powerful God in a way, and so he says he agrees with the Buddha that this is impure. But then Shariputra honestly says what he thinks. He says to the God, he says, "As for me, O Brahma, I see this great earth with its highs and lows, its thorns, its precipices, its peaks and its abysses, as if it were entirely filled with shit." I translate ordure here. I'm so young. I'm untenured and young at that time. Sanskrit word is the word for shit. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be vulgar, but that is what is written in Sanskrit, not ordure, How could I do that? It's trying to be polite, The fact that you see such a Buddha field as this, as if it were so impure, Reverend Shariputra, is a sure sign that there are highs and lows in your mind, and that your positive thought in regard to the Buddha wisdom is not pure either. Reverend Shariputra, those whose minds are impartial toward all living beings, and whose positive thoughts toward the Buddha wisdom are pure, see this Buddha field as perfectly pure. Thereupon the Lord touched the ground of the billion-world galactic universe with his big toe, and suddenly it was transformed into a huge mass of precious jewels, a magnificent array of many hundreds of thousands of clusters of precious gems, until it resembled the universe of the Tathagata jewel array, called endless virtuous jewel array. Everyone in the entire assembly was filled with wonder, each perceiving himself or herself seated on a throne of jewel lotuses. So in other words, the Buddha just did this little miraculous thing, to put his toe on the ground, and then everyone for a moment saw the world as perfect. And that's described metaphorically as if everything was made of jewel. And the way the Buddhist Pure Lands are very elaborately described in the Buddhist Sutras. The jewel lotus means, of course, when we might think of everything as jewel, that's just a visual thing. If you think tactilely of jewels, it's sort of hard, like who would want to sit on a bed of diamonds? It would be terribly uncomfortable. But heavenly jewels, you have to understand, in the Sanskrit universe, are soft and squishy. And they're warm. And they have light inside them, like light bulbs. And they're kind of like this diamond, neon, ruby, emerald, sort of incredible, gushy, swishy thing, And even the bodies of beings are made of this, So that your veins are pure ruby flowing in like topaz skin, that is warm and soft, though. But it's yet intensely exquisite and beautiful and valuable. And everybody's body is transparent, and etc. They don't actually have coarse blood flow and atoms. They just have these like hologram type of beautiful bodies. The gods do. Like jewels. Just everything is like a jewel. And then also in those jewels, they don't have plumbing. They don't have problem. In those jewel universe, every energy is brought to them. They don't need to eat food. The energy just goes in through the pores and comes out and goes back and forth. And they live in this jewel lotus, and all they do is need to samadhi. It's like the ultimate zendo. You're there forever. You never have to get up. You never have to, as Sasaki Roshi used to say, you don't have to go out and change the sheets. You never have to bother. It's just a fantastic environment, totally perfect. You're like in suspended state where you can achieve enlightenment. That's all. That's what a pure Buddha land is. The perfect situation for you permanently to achieve enlightenment. The perfect facility. Not just like some Dharma center is, but the whole world is the perfect facility. That is the claim he's making here. And he temporarily shows it to people. They suddenly feel they're installed in this jewel lotus. And everything is jewel, and their body is jewel. And their mind is jewel, and they're totally clear. Perfect environment. But it only holds if then he says, so she rubs it in on Shariputra, who says, now Shariputra, do you see the world as perfect? Everything perfect? Oh yes, I see it, he says. And then a lot of people, this always happens, you see. When this splendor of the beauty of the virtues of this Buddha field shone forth, 84,000 beings in that assembly conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. That is to say, seeing the perfection like this, they conceived the will, the ambition to create the world like that. To get into the energy of creating it like that. to be a Buddha themselves for the sake of all others. 84,000 of the people in the assembly conceived of that will to enlightenment. And the 500 Lichavi youths who had already previously conceived that will to enlightenment, who had accompanied the young Lichavi Ratnakara, all attained the conformative tolerance of ultimate birthlessness. That's a kind of level of realization of emptiness. It's called the tolerance of non-production or birthlessness. The idea that all things are unproduced, uncreated. This is empty, that means. It's a kind of, that's a complicated thing. I'll explain it later. But it's kind of realization of emptiness, a level of the wisdom, that is. Then the Lord withdrew his miraculous power, and at once the Buddha field was restored to its usual appearance. Then both men and gods who subscribed to the disciple vehicle thought, alas, all constructed things are impermanent. And then others conceived the spirit of unexcelled, totally perfect enlightenment. That conceiving the spirit of unexcelled, totally perfect enlightenment is what I said to you, is that moment where a being in their evolution suddenly conceives the desire, the will to perfect enlightenment, the will to perfection, the will to the perfection of evolution for the sake of all beings. It's the root of true altruism. It's the root of the bodhisattva life. It's the root of developing the bodhisattva soul, almost you could say, the bodhicitta. And once what being develops that, then their whole course of evolution, all their future rebirths are changed. The quality of their existence is totally changed. Because they're living out of a vow, out of a will to be totally interconnected, to be living in and for all beings. Even though they don't immediately perceive that, their wisdom is not at the level of being able to perceive that, their emotional commitment is to that. But of course, that emotional commitment then all comes and energizes the will to develop the wisdom. So they understand it. So they know how to live up to being connected to all beings. So that's the way the thing is set up. That's the first chapter of the Vimalakirti. Now the second chapter, then after that in the Vimalakirti, they introduce Vimalakirti himself, who is the main protagonist of the sutra. And he is not the Shakyamuni Buddha. The first chapter is set in the Buddha's grove. And Vimalakirti isn't even there. And in the last couple of chapters, they all go back to the Buddha's grove. Vimalakirti himself goes back. But Vimalakirti is a layman who lives in the city. And he's sick, supposed to be pretending to be sick. They say he's actually great. He's a Buddha, almost like a Buddha, but he's a layman. And he shows the form of an ordinary layman, but a wise old layman, sort of. But then he pretends to be sick, you see. He's going, oh, I'm so sick. He's going around saying he's sick. Oh, I feel terrible. I'm old. Oh, and he's like moaning and groaning and sick. He's actually beyond, he's sort of almost an adept, so he doesn't really have to be sick. But he sort of has a kind of diamond health, as he puts it. But he's purposely being sick to teach people, laymen, because then he gives them a chance to give a long sermon about how the ordinary body is a pile of dung, and it's a scrap heap, and it gives you pain all the time, and why work your life long for your body? Your body's going to rot and turn to ashes or turn to dirt or fertilizer. And why are you spending your life feeding your body and clothing your body and housing your body and medicalizing and messing with your body? Put your energy into your mind, he says. Then if you put your energy into your mind and become enlightened, you'll get the diamond body of Buddhahood, he says. So he gives everyone this speech, and that's why he's going around being sick. And furthermore, he's setting up the drama of the sutra, because he knows that if you become sick in the Buddhist community, everyone has to come and see you, because everyone has to go and visit the sick. It's like within the etiquette of the Buddhist community. Nobody cannot visit the sick person. So they introduce him, Vimalakirti, how he is and how he lives. And then he gets sick, and that's in the second chapter. And the third and fourth chapters are very interesting because the Buddha's there in his grove there, and then he tells everybody, now you have to go and visit Vimalakirti, because Vimalakirti, at the end of the chapter where he's introduced, over in his house, by him sitting there alone, he says, Buddha is not kind. Buddha is uncompassionate. He's not sending anybody to visit me. And I'm sick, and I'm a Buddhist, I'm a member of the community, and nobody comes to visit me. So the Buddhist community sucks. They're no good. He purposely thinks it just out loud, kind of. So of course, Buddha reads his mind, he says, oh, we better send somebody over to Vimalakirti. So then he says, okay, Shariputra, why don't you go see Vimalakirti? He's sick. Go ask after his health and cheer him up, So Shariputra says, oh, no, but I don't think I want to go. So then he asks all these people, nobody wants to go. Why? Vimalakirti is such a learned person. Well, because Vimalakirti has a big mouth, you see, they don't want to go. Vimalakirti is the uncompromising Mahayana teaching of skill and liberative technique. He's the unfearless person. He's like unmatched eloquence. He exposes everyone's pretensions and hypocrisies and confusions, whether they're a saint or not. And so they all recount these experiences that were very uncomfortable for them. And of them, I thought I would read several of them, but one of them I thought I would read particularly is, I would particularly is the one where he criticizes Shariputra, the story that Shariputra tells about himself. Because it's so perfect in relation to the dualism and the non-dualism. It illustrates so beautifully what I've tried to tell you to introduce the Mahayana, the universal vehicle. So he says, the Buddha says, Shariputra, you go to inquire after the illness of the Lichavi Vimalakirti, says the Buddha. It's your turn. You're the head elder. You're the foremost of the wise. You're a saint. You have nothing else to do. You go see him. Thus having been addressed, the Venerable Shariputra answered the Buddha, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to ask the Lichavi Vimalakirti about his illness. Why? I remember one day when I was sitting at the foot of a tree in the forest, absorbed in contemplation, the Lichavi Vimalakirti came to the foot of that tree and said to me, Reverend Shariputra, this is not the way to absorb yourself in contemplation. Now you have to realize here, it doesn't have an impact unless you realize that Shariputra is like St. Peter or St. Paul or something. I mean, better if St. Paul was a bad guy first. I mean, Shariputra is a really good guy. He's a saint. He's the patriarch. Everyone respects Shariputra. You know, armies will stop and lay down their weapons when they see Shariputra in India at this time. And he's an icon in Buddhist art for thousands of years. I mean, this is a saint, a great saint, a great meditator. He was known as the greatest transic adept. There's a famous story about him. One day he was meditating and a little devil was there hitting him on the head with a hammer. And one of his friends had to come and shoo away with the devil. One of his friends who had this little demon who had magical powers could see that and had to shoo it away. And Shariputra never even knew it, never came out of his trance. When the guy roused him from his trance, he had a little headache. But he was a great yogi and a very saintly person. So to say to that kind of person, it's like walking up to real big shot Guruji, who can sit there and can stop their breathing for 2 days, who they've stuck in a tank in the Menninger clinic and noticed that he only took up 1 ounce of oxygen in 3 weeks or something. I mean, this is a real adept, And yet Vimalakirti goes to him and he says, this is not the way to meditate, Shariputra. No, you don't meditate like this. Disturbs his meditation first, although he says reverend. He's reverential to him. He treats his office of a monk and a priest and a saint reverently, but philosophically he's critical, and psychologically he's critical. And how does he criticize? He says, you should absorb yourself in contemplation so that neither body nor mind appear anywhere in the triple world. Did any of you, some of you I know have dabbled with Zen. Do you remember the famous thing that Dogen heard when he attained enlightenment? Some of you who know Zen must know that. His teacher woke up some guy who was asleep in the Zendo next to Dogen, and he whacked them one, and then he said to him, you should only meditate by casting off body and mind, the teacher said. And Dogen heard that, and then Dogen achieved enlightenment, or one satori. I mean, there are many satoris you achieve. You shouldn't even encourage the idea that there's only one sort of pop-off that's enlightenment. But he achieved that enlightenment at that time, his first major breakthrough. Asleep with the idea that you should only practice having cast off body and mind. Because if you have no body and mind to start with when you meditate, how can you meditate? And yet you should meditate having cast off body and mind, without body and mind appearing anywhere in the triple world. What does that mean? Triple world means for the desire realm, the form realm, realm of pure form, and the formless realm. These different samadhi, vast Buddhist cosmos, mental, psychophysical cosmos. And your body and mind appear nowhere within that. What would that mean? You're sitting there, but yet your body and mind are not appearing anywhere. That means you are meditating with your wisdom going omnidirectionally, where you are not indulgent in being a body sitting there. You are not leaving an intact a sense of intrinsic identity or intrinsic objectivity about your body as this body is sitting here. From within, you are not allowing that to remain intact. You are not allowing your mind to remain intact in a sort of, my mind is now meditating. I am not going to think. I am going to disidentify from that thought. So my mind is doing that. Your wisdom, critical, analytic, critical intelligence is focused on everything that appears to you, body or mind, and seeing through it, not allowing it, not accepting its apparent objectivity. not finding it. Look for your body. Close your eyes and look for your body. You can't find it if you look. If you don't look and assume, I'm sitting here, you can assume it. But take 1 minute and look at your body. You won't find it. You go like this. You can't. You touch a piece of arm. That's not your body. That's a piece of something. But where are we, really? We are nowhere within the triple world, really. If we really knew. You think we're on the planet Earth in New York, etc. How do you think it looks from 20 trillion light years away, where we are? If someone had a vision that encompassed time in its different moments simultaneously, where would we be? Like a camera that, that takes something, image moving across a thing, like a time exposed thing that goes click, click, click like that, and you see the moon going across like little bits. If someone had a consciousness like that, what would we look like? Where would we be? So this is radical, critical wisdom meditation he is saying to Shariputra. Don't just be someone sitting there, I'm sitting here under this tree, meditating, I'm now going up into some form realm, I'll come back down. Leaving intact a whole cosmology as if it were objectively established as a thing in itself. All things, the form realm is empty of being the form realm. The tree is empty of being the tree. The foot of the tree is empty of being the foot of the tree. The body is empty of being the body. The mind is empty of being the mind. Don't leave it sitting there, body, mind, under a tree, absorbed in contemplation in some dualistic way of abstracting yourself out of a sort of left cosmology. Left as a thing in itself, intactly sitting there. Do you follow me what he's saying? That's what he's saying. He says, you should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you can manifest all ordinary behavior without forsaking cessation. You have achieved nirvana. Shariputra has achieved nirvana, nirodha, cessation of suffering. He has exploded his self-centeredness of a certain kind, definitely. He's a saint. He doesn't care about himself in some way, in a normal psychological personality level. Nirvana is your way of being in the world. When you are truly free, you are a free being in the world. The world seems free to you. You can be aware then that it doesn't to others, and you can help them see it as free. Effectively, because it does seem free to you. But that, short of having fully realized that, that is a contemplation. That is a way of being absorbed in contemplation. Here I am in nirvana, that is a contemplation. I am now going to be ordinary, though. By being ordinary, by being humble. Say someone insults me, Shariputra, I'm the great saint. They say, you're a jerk, Shariputra. Well, I'm going to be in nirvana, I'm going to be humble, and that will be an ordinary way. And I'll just be ordinary with that person, and yet I will not lose nirvana. Nirvana does not depend on me having an image of being in nirvana. Nirvana is my freedom to be anywhere I want. If I need to be humble, to be ordinary, if I need to be unenlightened, if someone is considering me unenlightened, I can be unenlightened, and I do not lose enlightenment. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you can manifest the nature of an ordinary person without abandoning your cultivated spiritual nature. You should absorb yourself in contemplation so that the mind neither settles within nor moves without toward external forms. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way in and out is same. Within and without are same. They are equal. We are equally within ourselves and without ourselves, if we realize relativity. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that the 37 accessories of enlightenment are manifest without deviation towards any convictions, without getting hung up on any attitudes or any dogmatic ideas. You should absorb, the 37 accessories are like wisdom, meditation, concentration, memory, etc. These are the accessories of enlightenment. They're sort of the actual mental functions into which the enlightenment can be broken down usefully to see how it functions. You should absorb yourself in contemplation in such a way that you are released in nirvana without abandoning the passions that are the province of samsara. And that's very challenging. You can have emotions, Shariputra. You can even be, because how can you be with people if you're so cooled out? You're so burnt out, you're so blown out. How can you get close with people and really help them? Passions, you can, But you do not have to abandon the passions to be in nirvana at all. That's what he's saying. Reverend Shariputra, you can use those energies in a totally different way. That's what he actually means. That's complicated, but very interesting. Reverend Shariputra, those who absorb themselves in contemplation in such a way are declared by the Lord to be truly absorbed in contemplation. Lord, when I heard this teaching, I was unable to reply and remain silent. Therefore, I am reluctant to go to that good man and ask him about his illness. It's not that he says he won't go. An earlier translator this says, I don't want to go, or no, I'm afraid to go, or something, or I won't go, I refuse to go, something like that. But he doesn't say I will refuse. This means I'm not enthusiastic about going. I'm reluctant to go. But Buddha takes that and says, well, okay, you're excused then. And he asks another person, and he asks another person, and they all have a story. So you read through these chapters, and they're both monks. Now, Vimalakirti is very famous for being a layman who is wiser than many great monks. So some people thought that sort of the main point of the Vimalakirti Sutra was to sort of show that you don't have to be a monk. But that's too simplistic. He equally rejects many bodhisattva lay people for their dualistic attitudes. He even gets the devil, actually. Vimalakirti just gets after the devil. There's one wonderful incident where a lay bodhisattva, although with a vow of temporary vow of chastity, is approached by the devil, whose name is Mara, who actually lives in a heavenly plane. He doesn't live underworld. There's another one in the underworld, but that's not the figure of the tempter, you know, the devil, the tempter. He's approached by Mara, who comes and says, I happen to have 12,000 extra girls, all goddesses. And I think you look lonely, so I'm bringing them down to wait on you hand and foot for a while. So the guy is like really a bit tempted, but he's saying, no, that's not proper, I shouldn't do that, you can't do that. And he was trying to sort of feebly refuse. And then Vimalakirti shows up. And as soon as he sees Vimalakirti, Mara tries to flee. You know, he wants to go, but Vimalakirti has like a magical power. The devil can't budge. He's stuck there. And he's very uncomfortable. So Vimalakirti says, I forget the name of the bodhisattva, but he says to the bodhisattva, Jagatimdara, that's what it is, Jagatimdara. He says, Jagatimdara, this is not really, because Mara tries to appear as Indra, the king of the gods. So he says, Jagatimdara, this isn't really Indra. You know, that's like Zeus, in other words. He appears as Zeus. This is not Zeus. This is Mara, the evil one, the devil, the tempter. He's just come here to lead you astray and give you all these girls, and you become like a libertine, and you'll waste your life just living it up in some superficial, egocentric manner. And so you should beware of this guy. He's not Indra, but he's Mara. So then Mara says, okay, well, if it's going to be like that, I'm going to split. I'm going to get out of here. You can't go, says Vimalakirti. You have made a gift of these 12,000 girls. So therefore, you shouldn't give them to this Jagatindara because he is a bodhisattva who will be corrupted by them. But you can give them to me, he says. I want them. So then Mara's trying to get away, but his magical thing is holding him there. Then a voice from the sky, Brahma probably, but they don't say it, says, Mara, you won't be able to leave until you follow through on your gift and give the girls to Vimalakirti. So then he gives the 12,000 goddesses to Vimalakirti. They have big numbers in the Mahayana. You know, they go for big numbers. So then Vimalakirti says, this is great. I'm glad you girls came. Now, I've always thought that Mara overworks you and that you have a very boring time up there. Now, admit it. It's no fun being Mara's girls. Now, Mara's like a pimp, really, isn't he? Sort of like Leroy and Mara. He says, it's no fun just working in his string of girls. And there's no reason why you're very intelligent. You should achieve bodhisattvahood. And he gives them some teaching about something called the joy in the Dharma and the pleasures of the Dharma and real pleasure. And he gives a long thing about liberation and freedom and insight and the different pleasures that are the real pleasures of the mind, of becoming free of mind. And they, being very intelligent goddesses, do achieve high stage of insight. Many of the different ones, different stages, right away. And Mara still can't get away. He's sitting there stuck and having to watch his girls being trained and become enlightened. He's really pissed off. So they become quite enlightened. And he says, in the future, therefore, goddesses, you will now know what is true pleasure, and you will realize that the pleasure of the heaven of pleasure of Mara, and he has a very heavy-duty heaven of pleasure. He has, in the different pleasure heavens, there's one, he lives in one called Yama, which means completely strife-free. Above him is a heaven which he can send people to, which is called the heaven of manifesting whatever you desire. That is, you have any desire, and you can emanate it, and you can enjoy it. If you want to be a different body, if you want to have like 10 lovers, if you want to have like swim in a pool of honey, anything you want, you can completely create it by mind. It's a heaven of purely malleable energy forms. And then the heaven above that is one where you're so jaded by the earlier one, you can't even think of what you'd like. So the one above that is called Paranirmita Vashavarti. It means where you can enjoy vicariously all the emanations of others. So all you do in that one is you kind of sit there and other people have fantasies and you enjoy them. Well, those that you like, you don't have to enjoy all of them. And these are the higher heavens in what's called the desire realm. And even those are lower heavens compared to the form realm heavens or the formless realm heavens in the Buddhist cosmology. But that's where Mara dwells, in that kind of area. So these girls have a pretty heavy-duty time. I mean, they live in a permanent jacuzzi heaven, And yet, fantasies, sense pleasure is not that great. Finally, it's coarse compared to inner pleasures of inner freedom. The inner openings, the inner sensitivities of the mind in opening to freedom is infinitely more blissful than any kind of sensory bliss. Although, of course, truly great sensory bliss leads to that inner thing. It connects to it, but that's another subject. And so they learn this and they like it. So then they're all ready to go back, or they're ready to stay with Vimalakirti, to stay on the earth plane and enjoy the pleasure of the Dharma. But then Vimalakirti says, actually though, it would not be proper and suitable for you goddesses to hang around Vaishali here. The human males would all go insane. He doesn't actually say that, I'm embroidering, but they would. These are goddesses, And, you would be unhappy, and everyone would think that Buddhism was weird, and, we don't need you here. Who really needs you is Mara needs you. So I'm going to give you back to Mara. And they say, no, don't give us back to Mara. We don't want to go back with him, back to the creepy pleasure world of his. And he says, don't worry, I will teach you a teaching called the inexhaustible lamp. And that teaching is a teaching where your new insight, when it touches another being, it will kindle the same insight in them. Just like a lamp can light infinite other lamps without exhausting itself. So you will become lamps of the Dharma in those pleasure heavens. And this is, of course, the worst thing for Mara, because now everybody in his whole heaven is going to become enlightened. So Vimalakirti sends them back, and you get the impression that that whole heaven is invaded by this enlightenment, and poor Mara, instead of living in his jacuzzi, even he may have to meditate and realize enlightenment. You never know. Although he may be actually already enlightened in another sense, which we'll deal with later. So there's another wonderful incident. What I like about that incident is it again shows the difference between the Mahayana and the monastic vehicle. Remember, the Buddha under the Bodhi tree was approached by Mara. And Mara brought his daughters, as they say, or his girls. And they tried to tempt the Buddha. And the Buddha just didn't see them as anything tempting. And there was a kind of wall of detachment around the Buddha, and they just didn't penetrate that. But he doesn't, and then he attains enlightenment. They go away when they're frustrated, they don't succeed, Mara disappears, and then Buddha goes and teaches the world. So again, there's a dualistic idea that still Mara is lurking out there. But here, Vimalakirti, he interacts with Mara, he grabs Mara's girls, he teaches them the Dharma, he sends them back to Mara's heaven, where Mara came from. He doesn't leave Mara's heaven intact as a place of ignorance, in other words. Do you follow me? So this is the universalism. It's not that he's greater than the Buddha. Buddha is actually doing that. Buddha is indivisible from Vimalakirti. It's just that he is showing this more aggressive universalism than Buddha shows. Buddha shows it in a more like, we're just dropping out of the world, guys. We're not really trying to change anything. He does this dualism, you see, to get started, kind of. It's of ignorance. So they don't just crucify him and throw him away. No, they allow him to build big institution. So that's another great one. And then the third one I really like is the one about giving gifts, but I don't think I'll do that. Really, finally, what is the Dharma? The real refuge is the Dharma, remember I said? And what is the Dharma? Remember, finally, what the Dharma actually is the reality, is nirvana, is freedom. The real refuge in the Dharma is really being in nirvana, attaining nirvana. It's very possible to realize this. We do anyway. We look for things. When you buy something, you inspect it, you go, you kick the tires, you look into the motor, you study you go to a consumer guide. You take things apart and look at its reality, and you come up to a certain level of satisfactory sense that you know what it really is, what you're getting, right? We all do, right? We analyze it and look into it. We don't buy something without knowing what it is, right? So when we go in to join the sciences, we analyze chemicals, We analyze the universes if we're astronomers. We look into atoms if we're microbiologists. If we're physicists, we go down and smash quarks or whatever, atoms, and look for quarks. We into really investigating the nature of reality. The one thing we don't do in our normal world in the West is we don't put that same degree of energy and effort into looking internally with our own mind into primary reality of ourself. There's an incident in Vimalakirti, one of the incidents which the Venerable Upali, who's the great Vinaya master, master of discipline, master of ethics, and he's ordaining a bunch of young Lichavis as monks and telling them to renounce the world and attain nirvana and separate from everything and so on. And Vimalakirti comes and says, Upali, this is a bad idea with these monks, these young men. They actually have the spirit of enlightenment of the Bodhisattva. They don't actually need the monastic way, and it would actually it would be a backward step for them. And therefore, you shouldn't ordain people unless you're clairvoyant as to their former karma. Granted, they have forgotten in this life that they conceived the will to unexcelled perfect enlightenment in a previous life. But let's see how quickly they can remember. He then teaches them for about 2 minutes, a couple of things, and they all remember that they want to be bodhisattvas. And when then if they do that, then they don't want to be monks, although that's not, that can be wrongly understood. Some bodhisattvas want to be monks or nuns, but they didn't. And it wasn't proper for them, and he saved them from going through a complicated path because A, they couldn't remember their former life resolve, and B, the master was not clairvoyant about their former life. The bodhisattva vow is, you don't say, hey, I don't want to get enlightened until all other beings are, when you take the vow. You don't say that. Sometimes, as a way of praising the bodhisattva, it's sort of stated like that, which again is only a mode of praise, remember, in a culture where a lot of people do attain enlightenment, and even a lot of people do attain liberation. And so you can therefore think that you mean something when you say somebody is avoiding attaining it. Because it's not that hard to attain, in other words. Right? That implies that. But when you take the vow, you don't say that. When you take the vow, you say, I'm going to become totally enlightened, that is to say, a Buddha, not just liberated, for the sake of all beings, so I can benefit all beings effectively. It's a totally positive thing like that. And then when you become a Buddha, there's a thing where there's said to be 3 modes of becoming a Buddha. You can become like a king, like a boatman, or like a ferryman, or like a shepherd. The most emotionally kind of satisfying may be to be like a shepherd, or a cowherd, a herdsman who shoves all the animals into the paddock and then goes in themselves and closes the gate, right? So that everyone else enters before the herdsman. That feels most emotionally satisfying. It's most emotionally altruistic seeming. The ferryman is okay. You and the people arrive at the shore at the same moment that the boat touches the shore, so that everybody's at the shore. But the king, and the king may seem less, the king is crowned themselves and gains power of the king, and then uses the power of the king to make the kingdom into a model kingdom and make everybody happy in the kingdom. So the king one seems kind of less, you get to be king first and other people are not king, But the king is said to be the most practical. How can you really help other beings unless you are a Buddha? You see? You have to have that wisdom of Buddhahood and really know their situation, really know the nature of the world. And then your compassion is really effective. Before that, it's a good wish. It's a great energy. It's a building sense of connectedness. But it can't, and it helps you, therefore, in that you get tremendous energy of the will to do something for these people. But the actual ability to actually do the necessary for the people, you don't get until you're really a Buddha. For sure. I mean, you may gropingly do something, but you won't know for sure until you have total awareness of the situation of the people, which you can't have until you're a Buddha. There's one thing we must remember about Mahayana Buddhism and all Buddhism, basic rule. They say that note that there are 2 kinds of teaching in Buddhism. what are called interpretable teachings and definitive teachings. The interpretable teaching is a teaching that, while valid, is something that can be interpreted as the person who understands it develops, and will lead to something other kind of understanding, perhaps later. In other words, it's sort of relative. It's relative. It's provisory for the time, but it can be modified. And the definitive one is the one that is the way it is, as it is, and has to be understood the way it is, and there's no deviation from it. You know, it's sort of a final teaching. It corresponds to ultimate reality in a way. Right? Now, it is said that all teachings about relative reality are interpretable. None of them, in that sense, in a way, can withstand ultimacy-seeking rational analysis, as they call it in Buddhism. If you look for a bodhisattva, you won't even find a bodhisattva. If you look for a Buddha with your critical thing, you won't find a Buddha. If you look for a non-Buddha, you won't find a non-Buddha. If you look for yourself, that means you yourself. If you look for your own world as an ordinary world, you won't find an ordinary world. If you look for some extraordinary world, you won't find an extraordinary world. If you look for yourself as a Buddha, you won't find yourself as a Buddha. If you look for yourself as a non-Buddha, you also won't find yourself as a non-Buddha. Because everything about a relative world is only relative and has no ultimate status. The only thing that has ultimacy is emptiness. To find an extraordinary. Emptiness is the only definitive teaching. The teaching of emptiness also, remember, is a negation. It's what's called an absolute negation. It has no affirmation in it of anything else. It implies nothing else. It only means that all things lack intrinsic identity. All things lack intrinsic reality. All things lack transiency and intransiency. Impermanence is a more preliminary stage of beginning to see the world dissolve from its sense of being objectively established as things in itself, the way we habitually perceive it. Impermanence is a very initial level of that. And there's coarse and subtle impermanences. Coarse one is just sort of knowing that everything will pass away. You know, when you see it, you know it'll be gone at some point, but it still seems solidly there to you. Subtle impermanence is where you actually can perceive the vibratory nature of reality. They say you can actually see atoms. You can see things as sort of trembling subatomic energies in atoms. You see through things. You see the world as sort of vibrating, as a sort of, you sort of see photons or something. You see the dance of neurons and photons, some sort of buzzing, blooming vibration, they say. But even that is not ultimate reality. That's a preliminary level. The higher level is selflessness, realitylessness, it can be called, emptiness, where you get free of all notions about things, or notions about no notions about things, where you strip away your normal conceptual grasping on things by grasping after the ultimate reality of things, not by just pretending to suspend your grasping, but by trying as hard as you can to grasp things in the ultimate way. You will begin to erode the grasping habit itself. And that's the only really reliable thing. So therefore, all cosmological teachings have a great use for developing compassion, for developing generosity, for developing the will to realize wisdom and so forth. But none will withstand wisdom's analysis. That is why the foundation of the Mahayana is in wisdom, perfect wisdom. I realize there's one more thing in Vimalakirti I did want to look at. Vimalakirti and Manjushri have a big talk. Look very closely at the 5th chapter, where they talk about emptiness. It's very, very interesting. This was very beloved by the Taoists in China, and later it comes up again and again in Zen. But I'm not looking at that first dialogue with him and Manjushri. I'm looking to where Vimalakirti actually begins to tell Manjushri how to console an invalid. He gives the teaching of the personal selflessness and the objective selflessness, or phenomenal selflessness, in terms of the consoling of an invalid. Because that's, after all, why Manjushri came to see him finally. Finally, Manjushri goes to see Vimalakirti, you see. Everyone else is scared to go. But Manjushri is not, because Manjushri is the bodhisattva of perfect wisdom. He doesn't mind being scolded by Vimalakirti. But he and Vimalakirti have the same intelligence, so he doesn't mind, you know. So then he goes there and he says, how should he how should a bodhisattva console another bodhisattva? After they go through this incredibly deep repartee sort of thing, he then says, how should a bodhisattva console another bodhisattva who is sick? And then he gives one thing about impermanence and things which are kind of preliminary, and about suffering and compassion, which I'm going to skip because I want to go just this one. On page 45. He says, Manjushri, a sick bodhisattva should control his own mind with the following consideration. Sickness arises from total involvement in the process of misunderstanding, that's ignorance, from beginningless time. Sickness would be this world of imperfection, right? That's like the same. So sickness, he says, sickness arises from total involvement in the process of misunderstanding from beginningless time. So it didn't come from anywhere, but it's just been going on beginninglessly. It arises from the passions that result from unreal mental constructions, and hence ultimately nothing is perceived which can be said to be sick. It's exactly what I said, actually, isn't it? Parallel. He says, so it arises from the passions that themselves result from unreal mental constructions, which is the process of misknowing, the process of delusion. And therefore, ultimately, that means actually, in fact, even when someone is sick, even this world that is imperfect, ultimately, nothing is perceived which can be said to be sick. There is no world to be perceived which can be said to be imperfect. As he said about the Buddha land, he said, you cannot build a house in an empty place, but you might try, but you wouldn't be able to do it because it's empty. Bodhisattva doesn't really try to build a Buddha land, a realistic Buddha land, an intrinsically objective Buddha land in empty space, and he knows everything is empty space. So perfection and imperfection are two ways of seeing a reality that actually is pure emptiness, and they are ways of constructing it according to certain type of relations, neither one being really real. Why? The body is the issue of the four main elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And in these elements there is no owner and no agent. There is no self in this body.
The Bob Thurman podcast is produced through a Creative Commons No Derivatives license. Please be sure to like, share, and repost on your favorite social media platforms. And is brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla membership community and listeners like you. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit our websites at thus.org, menla.org, and bobthurman.com. Tashi Delek, and thanks for tuning in.